In this lesson, we're going to focus on naming. Our objectives are to understand how to name objects in geometry and to understand how to mark congruent segments. For the vocabulary, I'm going to give you the words, and your job will be to look up the definitions or get them from the video as I'm speaking about some of these things. So, the vocabulary words are as follows: point, line, plane. These are the basic building blocks of geometry. Segment, ray, angle. Collinear, coplanar, endpoints, congruent, midpoint, and bisect. When we start with naming, we're going to start with the most basic, which is a point. Points are just spots in space. Typically, we name them using a letter. So this one here, we would call point A. Hence, this being point B and this being point C. Points are then later used to name other things, such as lines, segments, and so forth. Our next big thing is a plane. Now here I've basically drawn a rectangle or a square, but in reality a plane goes forever in 4 directions. So it's a two-dimensional shape, or a two-dimensional object with height and width, but no depth. And so the width of this goes forever left and right. The height goes forever up and down. This is just a portion of the plane. We typically name a plane based off of a letter that we call it. So this would be plane P. The next idea here would be, how would we name a line? Well, we want a quick, easy way to reference a line. So what we typically do is we look at the letters on the line and we name it with at least 2 of those. We can name it with 3 or more, but typically 2. So here we actually have multiple ways to name this. We could call this line X, Y, being that X and Y are both on here. But instead of writing out the word line, we draw a line above it and we put arrows because lines go on forever. We could also call this X, Z. We could also call it X, Y, Z. Now when you name something with points, make sure they're always in an order. So X, Y, Z, you can't say X, Z, Y. Okay? So what I'd like you to do is try and come up with a few other methods of naming this line. Segments are named exactly the same. We typically use 2, sometimes 3 letters, but with a segment, we always focus on the end points of the segment. So here we have a full segment. A and B have to be in the name. And we put a segment above it with endpoints. No arrows because this ends. That's what the endpoints are. We could also call this A, M, B. Again, try and come up with another way or 2 to name this one. Rays, on the other hand, are very finite. They have an exact way of naming them. We always start with the endpoint first. So here we have an endpoint. X is just a point on the ray as this part keeps going. So Y actually has to be our first point in this name. So this one's going to be called YX. And above it, we put an actual ray with the endpoint above Y. That tells us that this is the endpoint one. And this one only has one way of naming it, so you don't need another option here. Typically when we name angles, we have about three ways that we typically name them. What we like to use is the little angle symbol. The most common way that you'll see is just using what's called the vertex, or where the two rays come together, this B here, and we call it angle B. So we make a little angle sign and put B after it. Another common way is if there's a number or a letter inside the angle, we'll sometimes also call it based off of that. So this one could also be called angle 1. Now, if multiple angles share the same the same vertex value, then we will typically use a three-letter system. So here, what we would do, and when we use the three-letter system, we always put the vertex in the middle. So the other option here would be angle A, B, C. A, B, C. There's one other option for naming this angle. Try and figure it out if you can. The last thing isn't really naming, it's actually marking things. Congruent segments. Congruent means that things are equal. So we want to be able to show that things are equal without actually having to write everything down. So here what we're going to say is that AB equals XY. Because these are equal to each other, we want to mark them as such. So what we do is we typically use tally marks. We put one tally mark here. Since this one is equal to that one, they should have the same number of tally marks. I'm going to put one there. Okay? In this segment, we're going to say that M is the midpoint, which means that it's halfway between, which means it bisects. So both sides of it are equal to each other. So again, this is going to say that LM equals MN. So to mark this, we need to show that these two segments are the same. Because we've already used one tally mark here, we've got to use something different. So I'm going to use two tally marks. So LM here is going to have two tally marks. MN is going to have two tally marks. Because these have the same number, they're equal. Because these have the same number, they're equal. Alright, this has been a video on naming and some congruency. If there is any part of it you didn't understand or you missed, please rewind, watch again, and bring any questions to class. Thank you.